the things that I learned about wilderness survival back in the days before GPS units was that if you realize you're lost and you don't know where you are, much less where to go and how to get there, the best thing you can do is just sit down. Stay put. Don't make matters worse. Don't panic. Calm down. Trust your training, your preparation. As we continue our Lenten study of wilderness experiences, today I want us to focus on those times when we're in the wilderness experiences of life and we usually don't understand what's happening to us or why. The not knowing is the toughest part. How long is this going to take? Why is this happening to me? And this often leads us to question why God would allow it to happen to us. We're tempted to question whether God really is good, as our parents or our Sunday school teachers or our pastors told us when we were kids, or if God is really like some cruel little kid holding a magnifying glass over an anthill on a sunny day and we're the ant. Those kinds of wilderness experiences can be a time to doubt. One of the things that I really appreciate about our Wesleyan understanding of the Christian journey is we don't shy away from the doubts. We're not afraid of questions. But when questions in the wilderness experiences lead to doubt and we don't confront those doubts, it can be disastrous. Rob Renfro, who wrote the study guide that many of our classes and smaller spiritual groups are using during our Lenten series, wrote, "In the wilderness, we will either walk by faith or by feelings. If we base our lives on how we feel, singled out, hopeless, confused, angry, we'll not only fail to learn the lessons of the wilderness, but eventually we'll lose the strength and the focus we need to move forward." If we're walking by our feelings as opposed to our faith, forgetting our preparation, then we'll forget the promises of Scripture, like God gave through the prophet Jeremiah. "I know the plans I have in mind for you, declares the Lord. They are plans for peace, not disaster, to give you a future filled with hope." Or the Apostle Paul in Romans 8, verse 28, where he said, "We know that God works all things together for good for the ones who love God, for those who are called according to His purpose." Or the words of Christ Himself in His Great Commission, where He said, "Look, I myself will be with you every day until the end of this present age." Walking by faith means holding on to the truth that God is good even when life is not fair and does not make sense. Charles Spurgeon was a great pastor and Christian writer some time back. He wrote, God is too good to be unkind, and He is too wise to be mistaken. And when we cannot trace His hand, we must trust His heart. Now, the good news is, while we all have wilderness experiences, most of us don't spend all the time in the wilderness. And when we're not in the wilderness, our faith grows through reading the Bible, through praying, through fellowship with other Christ followers, through worship, and other means of grace, such as the Lord's Supper, which we will share together this morning. But when we're in the wilderness, God grows our faith by humbling us and bringing us, sometimes literally, to our knees. When we got nothing, and we've got no one to lean on but God, that's when we discover God is enough. Think of Moses. Moses was a prince in Egypt. I mean, the dude had a good life. He had a sweet life. He had it all. And then it all went away. Now, his anger that led to the murder of the Egyptian overseer may have been righteous at first, but it was still murder. And that caused him to lose it all. And he literally was driven out into the desert, out into the wilderness. From the palace to the poorhouse. And he spent the next several years as a shepherd. Hang on, not a real glamorous job. And to make matters even more interesting, they weren't even his sheep and goats, they were his father-in-law's. So he's working for his father-in-law. But that humbling experience then really prepared Moses to rely on God for the great mission God had in store for him. To lead the Hebrew slaves to freedom from Egypt into the promised land. Now, there are those times when our wilderness experience causes us to doubt whether God really is with us. We can feel awfully alone. That no one else has ever experienced what we've experienced. No one else has ever felt what we are feeling, and we are in it. There is nobody that is able to help us, and we wonder if God is even there. Those are the times when God says, trust me. Trust me. I promised I'd never let you down. Remember what we read from Hebrews. Right there in this second half of verse 5. After all, He, God, has said, I will never leave you or abandon you. Or that reading from Habakkuk. I mean, just think of the imagery. We tend not to be the kind of farmers that people were in Habakkuk's time. He says, though the fig tree doesn't bloom, and there's no produce on the vine, the olive crop withers, and the the fields don't provide food, though the sheep are cut off from the pen and there's no cattle in the stalls. In other words, there's no there there. There's nothing. I will rejoice in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my deliverance. When we're in the wilderness, we're tempted to do anything to get out, to make the pain stop. In my wilderness survival training, the instructor used the image of running around like a chicken with its head cut off. And I realize that's a metaphor that's kind of foreign to a lot of people here in the 21st century. Because we tend to buy our chicken already prepackaged with shrink wrap over it, right? But what that meant was running around frantically and literally, in the case of the chicken, mindlessly, with the risk that we might run right off the edge of the cliff. Now, you and I will probably not do that literally. There aren't that many cliffs here in Porter County. But we can certainly run off symbolic cliffs, can't we? If we're not careful. Our faith does not grow by numbing the pain of the wilderness experience. Professional athletes have to oftentimes play with pain. That's the mantra that coaches and fans and even the players themselves will recite. And so sometimes they will do something to cover up the pain, to relieve the pain so that they can play the next game or match. But the doctors say the risk is if you're not careful, not feeling the pain may result in even more injury that might be even more severe. Our faith doesn't grow by numbing the pain during the wilderness times, but by facing it head on. Jesus did. He had the pain of the literal wilderness experience after his baptism, the 40 days and 40 nights. The temptations by Satan, he faced them head on. And then he had the pain of his passion, knowing what was going to happen to him, and then going through everything that happened to him, leading up to his death on the cross. He faced it head on. And the goal of the Christian journey is, remember, for us to become more and more and more and more like Christ. Day by day by day by day. So when we're tempted to give in to doubt, hang on. Hang on longer. Certainly don't make matters worse. And walk in God's presence. As I said, when we are in the wilderness, it's so tempting to doubt whether God's with us or not. It is tempting. And we can almost get to where it's like we're wearing spiritual blinders. And here again, I'm using a symbol that some of you probably don't understand. Blinders are something that are put on horses so that it blocks their side vision. All they can do is see straight ahead. So nothing coming from the sides can distract them or scare them. And we can put on spiritual blinders so that we don't see anything else that's going on around us. And we're not aware, because of the blinders we've put on, that God is present with us. But if we walk in God's presence, if we are conscious in mind, heart, and spirit that God is with us, we'll experience God be with us. We need to be intentional about setting aside times and places to be with God, be alone with God. And that's often a challenge for us, because that brings up the word discipline, and that's a word we tend not to be all that fond of in the 21st century. And sometimes this requires us to work pretty hard to clean up our hearts and our minds of the thoughts and feelings that block us from experiencing God's presence. One of the most heartbreaking things I've ever read about the church came from folks called the Barna Research Group. The Barna Research Group's kind of like the Harris Poll or the Gallup Poll for Christians, for Christian churches. And they're us. I mean, they're part of us. They're part of us. They like us. But they study us and they tell us the truth about ourselves. And one of the studies that they reported said that, and I think the figure was 45%. It may have been higher than that, but 45, 55, 65. I don't know what the percentage is, but when you look at that percentage of Christians that say they have never experienced God's presence in worship, that breaks my heart. That may not be you, but that's probably one or more of the people sitting around you. And I hope that breaks your heart too. We need to open ourselves up to experience God's presence. Sometimes in worship, that means forgetting about the fact that the person, no one's sitting around us, or the person we really wanted to sit by was talking to someone else, or some of these other, they're really silly things that we use to block our experience of the presence of God in worship. Don't like the music. Why did they use that when it was on the video screen? Why don't they turn up the sound system a little bit more so I can hear it? It's too cold, it's too hot. I mean, all these silly things, right? That we use to block our experience of God's presence in worship. If we open ourselves up to God's presence, we will experience it. In just a little bit, we're going to share the Lord's Supper. Now, we do not believe that when the elements are consecrated that they are transubstantiated. We don't believe in the doctrine of transubstantiation, so that's your big church word for the day. The doctrine of transubstantiation believes that upon consecration, the bread, the wine, literally is changed in substance, transubstantiated into the body and blood of Christ. Okay? We don't believe that, but we do believe that those are symbols of the body and blood of Christ, and those are symbols of the real presence of Christ with us in the sacrament. So, I want to encourage you, when you take communion this morning, when you receive it, open yourselves up to experiencing the real presence of Christ. When you dip the bread into the cup and you put the bread in your mouth, and you taste it, and you chew it, and you swallow it. Experience the real presence of Christ with you and in you. Because when we open ourselves up to Christ's presence, we will experience it. Sometimes, eventually, occasionally, immediately, but always amazing. Throughout our Lenten series, we've been reminding ourselves of what it is we do believe about the God who's with us through and out of the wilderness. And we've been doing this by reminding ourselves of the creeds that so many generations of Christians before us have recited. And this morning, we're going to sing a creed. We're going to sing a version of the Apostles' Creed. Now, the words are going to be a little bit different. The substance is still the same. The words are a little bit different so that it will fit with the music. I want to invite you, if you're able, stand up when you do this to join with me in singing the Apostles' Creed.